I never thought I'd end up working on a fishing boat in Alaska. But there I was at 24, fresh out of a breakup that had left me hollowed out and desperate for something completely different. My ex-girlfriend had told me I was emotionally unavailable, that I never really let her in. And maybe she was right. I didn't know who I was anymore, so I figured the best thing to do was run as far away as possible. A friend of a friend knew someone who needed deckhands for the summer season, and 3 weeks later I was standing on a dock in Kodiak, staring at a weathered trawler called the Mariana's Prayer. The captain was a gruff man in his 50s named Dutch, who looked me up and down like he was inspecting a questionable cut of meat. "You ever worked a boat before?" he asked. I shook my head. "You get seasick?" "I don't know," I said honestly. He grunted. "Well, you're about to find out. Welcome aboard." There were 4 of us on the crew. Dutch ran the operation, then there was Tommy, a guy in his 40s who'd been fishing these waters for 20 years and had the leathered skin to prove it. There was me, the greenhorn, who didn't know port from starboard. And then there was Caspian. I noticed him right away, which I told myself was just because he was the only other person close to my age. He was maybe 26 or 27, tall and lean with dark hair that curled slightly when it got wet, which was basically always. He had this quiet competence about him, moving around the deck like he was born on the water, his hands quick and sure as he worked the lines. When Dutch introduced us, Caspian shook my hand and gave me a small smile. "First time out?" he asked. "That obvious," I said. He laughed, a low, warm sound that seemed to cut through the cold wind coming off the water. "Don't worry, I'll show you the ropes." Literally, those first few days were brutal. I'd never worked so hard in my life, hauling nets, sorting fish, my hands raw and bleeding even through the gloves. I was seasick, exhausted, and questioning every decision that had led me to this point. But Caspian was patient with me in a way the others weren't. He'd appear at my elbow when I was struggling with a knot or couldn't figure out how to secure a line, his voice calm and steady. "Here, like this." He'd guide my hands, showing me the motion, and I'd catch the scent of salt and sweat and something else, something that was just him. I started noticing things I shouldn't have been noticing. The way his jaw tightened when he was concentrating. The flex of his forearms when he was hauling net. The rare, full smile that transformed his whole face when Tommy told a particularly bad joke. At night, crammed into the tiny crew quarters, I'd lie in my bunk and listen to him breathing in the bunk across from mine, and I'd feel something tighten in my chest that I couldn't name. I told myself it was just the isolation, the intensity of the work, the fact that we were living in each other's pockets 24/7. I'd never thought about men that way. I'd had girlfriends. I'd been in love, or at least I thought I had been. But there was something about Caspian that made me feel more awake than I'd felt in years, more present in my own skin. We'd been out for about 2 weeks when it happened. The moment I couldn't pretend anymore. We'd had a good haul that day and Dutch was in a rare good mood, so he broke out a bottle of whiskey after dinner. We passed it around in the galley, the boat rocking gently in the calm water, and everyone was telling stories. Tommy was going on about some legendary storm from years back, and Caspian was leaning back against the wall, laughing, and the lamplight caught his face in a way that made my breath stop. He looked over at me right then, catching me staring, and something passed between us. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like the whole world tilted. His smile faded slightly, his eyes searching mine, and I looked away fast, my heart hammering. I mumbled something about needing air and stumbled up to the deck. It was late, the sun just barely setting, because this far north in summer, the darkness never really comes. The sky was this deep purple blue, and the water was smooth as glass. I gripped the rail and tried to breathe, tried to understand what was happening to me. I heard footsteps behind me and knew without turning that it was him. "You okay?" Caspian asked quietly. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. He came to stand beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. We stood there in silence for a long moment, and then he said, "It's beautiful out here, isn't it? Makes you feel small." I managed to speak then. "Yeah," I said. "It does." He was quiet for another moment, then said, "You ever feel like you're running from something?" The question caught me off guard. I glanced at him and found him looking out at the water, his profile sharp against the pale sky. "I guess," I said. "Isn't everyone?" He smiled slightly. "Maybe." He paused, then said, "I came out here 5 years ago. Needed to get away from my family, from all their expectations about who I should be. Needed to figure out who I actually was." My throat felt tight. "And did you?" "Figure it out." He turned to look at me then. Really look at me. And something in his expression made my pulse race. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I did." We stood there, the air between us charged with something I was terrified to name. And then Tommy's voice bellowed up from below, calling Caspian for something. The moment broke. Caspian gave me one more long look, then headed back down. I stayed on deck for another hour, my mind spinning. After that night, something shifted between us. We didn't talk about it, but there was a new awareness, a carefulness in how we moved around each other. I caught him watching me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. I became hyper-aware of every accidental touch, every time we had to work close together. My hands would brush his as we hauled lines, and I'd feel electricity shoot up my arm. We'd be sorting fish side by side and his shoulder would press against mine and I'd forget how to breathe. I started having dreams about him, vivid and intense, and I'd wake up in the dark of the crew quarters, disoriented and aching, and sometimes I'd hear him shift in his bunk and wonder if he was awake too, if he was feeling this same impossible pull. The work continued, brutal and unrelenting. We'd go out for 20-hour stretches, come back exhausted, sleep for a few hours and do it again. But in the stolen moments between, I found myself seeking him out. We'd sit together during meals, our conversations ranging from surface level to surprisingly deep. He told me about growing up in Oregon, about his parents who'd wanted him to be a lawyer, about the younger sister he missed. I told him about my aimless years after college, about feeling like I was supposed to want things I didn't actually want, about the breakup that had sent me running north. "You ever think maybe she was right?" he asked one night. We were alone in the galley, everyone else already asleep. "About you being emotionally unavailable." I looked down at my coffee mug. "All the time," I said. "But I don't think I was unavailable. I think I was just with the wrong person." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "What do you think the right person would be like?" My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I don't know," I said. "Someone who makes me want to be honest. Someone who makes me feel like myself. Only more so. Someone who scares me a little because of how much they make me feel." I looked up at him then and found him staring at me with an intensity that made my skin burn. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "Yeah, I know what you mean." Neither of us moved. The boat rocked gently beneath us, and I could hear the creak of the hull, the distant sound of water. I wanted to reach across the table, wanted to touch him so badly, my hands were shaking. But I was terrified, frozen by a lifetime of assumptions about who I was and what I wanted. Caspian stood up slowly. "I should get some sleep," he said. Big day tomorrow. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He paused at the doorway, looking back at me. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Coming out here, doing this, being willing to start over, that takes guts. Then he was gone, and I sat there in the empty galley, my whole world reorganizing itself around this new truth I could no longer deny. I was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified me more than it did. Maybe it was the isolation, the way life on the boat stripped everything down to essentials. But I found I didn't have the energy to lie to myself anymore. I wanted him. I wanted to know what his mouth tasted like, what his skin felt like under my hands. I wanted to fall asleep next to him and wake up to his face. I wanted to hear all his stories and tell him all of mine. I wanted him in a way I'd never wanted anyone. But wanting and having are different things, and I still didn't know if he felt the same way. Those long looks could mean anything. The careful way he touched me could just be friendship. I was probably reading into things, projecting my own feelings onto innocent interactions. The thought of making a move and being wrong, of ruining our friendship and making the rest of the season unbearably awkward, kept me paralyzed. Then came the night that changed everything. We'd had a particularly grueling day, 18 hours of non-stop work in rough seas. By the time we finally stopped, I was so exhausted I could barely stand. I'd grabbed some food, forced it down, and then stumbled up to the deck because the crew quarters felt too small, too stuffy. I'd meant to just get some air, but the night was calm and clear. And I sat down with my back against the wheelhouse, and before I knew it, my eyes were closing. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke to the sensation of warmth, of weight settling over me. I blinked my eyes open, confused and disoriented. The sky was lighter, dawn starting to break, and I was covered with a coat, a heavy canvas jacket that smelled like salt and diesel and something warm and familiar. Caspian's coat. I sat up, my heart suddenly pounding, and looked around. He was standing at the rail about 10 feet away, wearing just his thermal shirt, despite the cold wind. Looking out at the water, he must have heard me move because he turned. And when our eyes met, there was something in his expression that was raw and unguarded. You fell asleep, he said quietly. You were shivering. I looked down at the coat, then back up at him. You're going to freeze, I said. He shrugged. I'm okay. I couldn't look away from him, from the way the early light caught in his hair, from the vulnerability in his eyes. Why did you do that? I asked. My voice came out barely above a whisper. He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched him struggle with something, watched him make a decision. Because I care about you, he said finally. Because I've been trying not to, but I can't help it. Because every time I'm near you, I want to be closer. And it's driving me crazy. And I know you probably don't feel the same way. But I couldn't just leave you there in the cold. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump. I stood up, the coat falling away, and took a step toward him. What if I do? I said. Feel the same way. His eyes widened slightly. Do you? I closed the distance between us until we were inches apart. I could see the stubble on his jaw, the flecks of gold in his eyes, the way his chest was rising and falling rapidly. I've never felt this way about anyone, I said. Man or woman. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm terrified. But I can't stop thinking about you. I dream about you. I wake up wanting you. You make me feel more alive than I've ever felt. Something in his expression cracked open, and then his hand was coming up to cup my face. his palm warm against my cheek. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough. "Please," I said, and then his mouth was on mine. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Soft and urgent all at once, his lips moving against mine as his other hand came up to thread through my hair. I made a sound in the back of my throat and pressed closer, my hands fisting in his shirt, and the kiss deepened. He tasted like coffee and salt air, and when his tongue touched mine, I felt it all the way to my toes. We broke apart, both breathing hard, and he rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he said. "Me too," I said. "I didn't even know I wanted it until I met you, but I do. God, I do." He kissed me again, slower this time, tender and exploring, and I felt something in my chest open up, some locked door finally swinging wide. We heard footsteps below deck and sprang apart, both of us flushed and breathing hard. Caspian grabbed his coat from where it had fallen, and we stood there, grinning at each other like idiots as Tommy's head appeared at the hatch. "You two seen the—" "Oh, there you are. Dutch wants everyone for a meeting." We nodded, trying to compose ourselves, and followed Tommy below. But as we climbed down, Caspian's hand brushed mine, and his fingers squeezed for just a second, and I felt like I could fly. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We worked side by side as always, but now every look was loaded with meaning, every accidental touch deliberate. That night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, I felt him slip into my bunk, his body warm and solid against mine in the narrow space. We didn't do anything, just held each other, his breath soft against my neck, my arms wrapped around him. "This okay?" he whispered. "Perfect," I whispered back. We fell asleep tangled together, and I slept better than I had in years. Over the next few weeks, we stole every moment we could. Quick kisses in the galley when no one was looking, whispered conversations in the dark, his hand finding mine when we were alone on deck. We were careful, not wanting to broadcast anything to Dutch and Tommy, but I think they knew. Tommy gave me a knowing look once, but he didn't say anything, just clapped me on the shoulder and told me I was doing good work. Caspian and I talked about everything, about what this meant, about what would happen when the season ended. He told me he'd been out since he was 20, about the struggles with his family, about learning to accept himself. I told him about my own journey, about how I'd never let myself consider this possibility, about how right it felt now. We made plans, tentative at first, then more certain. We'd go back to Seattle together. We'd get an apartment. We'd figure it out. "I love you," he told me one night. We were on deck again, the place that had become ours, the northern lights dancing green and ethereal above us. I'd never said those words to anyone before, and meant them the way I meant them then. "I love you too," I said, and kissed him under the endless sky. The season ended in late August. We said goodbye to Dutch and Tommy, both of whom shook our hands and told us to take care of each other. We took the ferry back to the mainland, then drove down the coast in Caspian's beat-up truck, stopping at random beaches and tiny towns, learning each other in new ways now that we had privacy and time. We found an apartment in Seattle, a small place with big windows that overlooked the water. We found jobs, me in a bookstore, him doing boat repairs at a marina. We built a life together, piece by piece. Some days were hard, especially when I had to come out to my family, when I had to explain to friends that I was with a man now, that this was who I'd been all along without knowing it. But Caspian was there through all of it, steady and sure, loving me through the fear and the doubt. It's been 2 years now. Sometimes I think about that night on the deck, about waking up to find his coat covering me, about that simple act of care that changed everything. He saw me shivering, and he gave me his warmth. And in doing so, he gave me permission to finally be honest about who I was and what I wanted. We're planning to go back to Alaska next summer, both of us this time, maybe even buy our own boat eventually. But wherever we go, whatever we do, I know I'll never forget those weeks on the Mariana's Prayer, when I ran away from myself and ended up finding exactly what I'd been looking for all along. Love isn't always what you expect. Sometimes it's a deckhand with kind eyes and patient hands, someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway. Someone who covers you with their coat when you're cold, and in doing so, warms you from the inside out.